Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Type Thursday Book Club. We are still at it. When we're not at physical Type Thursdays, we meet at the Type Thursday Book Club. I'm your host, Thomas Jockin, founder of Type Thursday, and we have, as always, our two other chapter leads for Type Thursday chapters, Michael from Type Thursday Phoenix and Matheo from Type Thursday Los Angeles. By the way, today's a special episode because it is Mateo's birthday. Happy birthday, Matheo.
Happy birthday. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you.
Anytime. So it's going to be he has a birthday party dinner to go to. So this will be a addendum review this week, but it will still be an action-packed and insightful review. Well, what's Type Thursday? Type Thursday is a meeting place for people who love we have in-person type crits. You share work in progress projects and get dialogue and feedback from an active community who loves type. You make some friends along the way. When we're not meeting in person in local chapters around the world, we are at the Type Thursday Book Club, where we talk about type and books and other things related to design. It's fun times. This week, we read independently, and we're going to come together now and rate and discuss Ruined by Design by Mike Montiero, a book about design ethics, which I'm very excited to look at everybody talks about this week. And when we review this, we do apply the same rubric every week. I think this week will be a little unusual because of the nature of this book, but nevertheless, remind everybody, the 5 rubrics we use for our review are clarity of concepts, visual inspiration, practical application, typographic insight, and lastly, overall impact. We use on a 5-point rating scale. We don't know the rating. We're going to find out together live on call with you. If you've read the book, please leave your ratings in the chat or on YouTube. Be sure to hang out with us there. And with that said, shall we begin? We can transition over to the Fig Jam board. Our order will be Michael, myself, and Matheo.
Great. Well, we're going to go with clarity of concepts in this book. And I'm going to go, and I'm going to score this one a 4 out of 5. This book, I actually read his other book as well, or listened to it, a book on tape, actually, the F You Pay Me. And the one thing that I feel like Mike talks about in this book, it's very brash. Okay. So he communicates his arguments very clearly. I mean, from the opening paragraphs, like you get the tone of, how important that, he feels about, all these subjects. They're easy to grasp. And they're definitely the intensity of the tone can overshadow some of, the nuances of this, but that's how passionate he is about all of these subjects. And I'm sure in other, discussions that we have about this book, some of them at the time of the writing of this book were very poignant. They might not be as relevant in the age of AI and so there's a lot of discussion to be had here.
So to jump in, I will say, while I do think he's repetitious many times, it's not like I don't understand where Mike Montiero is coming from. And it's not that I do not understand what he's trying to communicate to us. So if we're asking the question, if I gave someone to read this book and asked them to explain back to me, what is Mike Montiero saying? I feel very confident by just the raw repetition of what he talks about that you will understand what he's saying. Now, one can make a critique that means that basically this book is maybe 2/3 longer than it needed to be for what he's trying to say. Nevertheless, by just raw repetition, he's super clear. So I know where he stands. I know what he's about. And I know his reasoning about why he thinks that way. So for those parts, it is very clear. Now, very bombastic and very over the top, as typical with Mike Montero's stuff, as famously known for F You Pay Me. But I think he's that gravitas and that kind of forcefulness has some usefulness of being clear. You may not disagree with it, and I do have disagreements about it. I think it lacks nuance in some very important areas. But in terms of what he's trying to say, I think it's very clear and cut from that perspective. So with that, he got a 5 from me.
Yeah, Thomas, you said exactly what I was thinking the whole time I was reading the book. Mike Montiero does an excellent job going through and explaining with clarity what major arguments he's making. There's nothing unclear about it. He gives plenty of examples, and I love the different stories he also gives you insight into. And he also points you to different books and articles to read and um, writers who've written about the subject. So, Michael, if you'll do me the honor, my rating for clarity of concepts is a solid 5 because, yeah, Mike Montero does a great job explaining exactly all the different points that he is frustrated about in the design industry, and especially coming from the user experience design community. So for me, solid 5 in this range.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, I feel like he could have cut down one by a half easily. I know the examples are useful because he repeats himself over and over again. But I felt like part 2 is actually where you got a lot of the clarity. Like if you just gave me part 1, this would be way lower. This would be like a 3. I think it was in part 2 of the text where you talk about the actual application. And I think a big note was he was not saying you don't get to subsidize or get credits, ethic credits. You don't get to get ethical credits because you work at Palantir, and then you go do some nonprofit volunteering, and now you're balanced out in terms of your karma of moral goodness. So I do that came more in part 2 where he really pushed point on you don't get to compartmentalize your ethics. A doctor can't do malpractice, like do something unethical in doctor medical, and then go do something and then do some charity work to compensate. That's not how this works. So he's using that line of argumentation. Again, there's flaws in his reasoning, but that's not the issue here. The issue is, does he make a strong case about why ethics needs to be considered from a design perspective? I think he does do that, mostly from part 2. So if I was anyone reading this book where he's talking about what is the nature of ethics in design, it is narrowed to user experience in general because that's his expertise and area of topic. But I do think that'd be more an application. Probably that's going to come up more as a discussion point. But with that said, I recommend strongly going to part. I think read the very first part. Like once you see your first repetition of part 1 about the claims he's making, I think you're good to go. Get over the part 2 and keep reading, in my opinion, if I had to summarize. So basically, I think if I was the editor, I would have told them part 1's great. We're cutting it out the last 2/3, and then we're going to jump to part 2 and maybe flesh that out a little further. Maybe. That's kind of just reflecting what I'm hearing back from the group.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely forces that ethical reflection that I've never had in my career. I never even thought about it. So it was definitely one of those things that was kind of like, it made me kind of step back and think of like, what am I contributing to? Which is something that in my career, I literally never considered. So in that sense, it's a great book. What about you, Matteo?
Michael, that's funny that you said you literally never considered it because in your particular experience, you worked in the user experience industry for Kaiser Permanente, a huge hospital or medical organization. And so the points that Mike Montero makes throughout his book feel very relevant, right? And so that I think I had a similar feeling of like, it hit close to home, but I think even more for you because he uses a lot of doctor analogies and metaphors throughout the whole book. So I was thinking of you, and you're right. I had the same moment of reflections where I was like pausing and looking at even the work I'm doing now for certain clients. I'm like, oh, okay, this is ultimately designed to make someone more money, and can I go do nonprofit work? And like Thomas said, is it going to like make up for it if I go give 10% of my time to nonprofits and 90% of my time to the work of making money? And I'm just like, I don't know, like I feel stuck. And I think we'll get to that in the other criteria, like practical application. But clarity of concepts, spot on. Very, very clear throughout this entire book about the points he's making, the why he's making those points, and why it's an issue.
Yeah, I have more commentary. Well, I think overall impact I'll reflect on what you're saying, Matteo, more. So we should probably get moving.
Yep. So next
And
up
the floor
is
yours, Michael.
Yeah, visual inspiration. So I'm going to I'm probably going to rank this pretty low as far as visual inspiration goes. I think it's in between a 1 and a 2, so I'll just put it right there. I could have put 2, but I think that's fitting. Not a visually inspiring book. The power comes from ideas, ethics, confrontation, and but it's definitely not a design book that we've talked about or that we geek out about. And it's very limited in technical or craft discussions, so it's like I guess that not much could be said more about this, and there's some other areas that we'll talk about later, but yeah, I have to go with like 1.5.
Way too generous. I mean, like it's a 1. Like, no, like compared to the other texts we've read in the other books we've read, like when we talk about visual inspiration, is you get wowed by the production of the book, or you get wowed by what's inside the book, or you get wowed by what possibilities. Like, and that's obviously, I mean, I can start giving some critiques on this point, is that basically it just says a lot of no, and his yeses are a lot of unions. I mean, I think the closest you get from a yes from this text that has a visual aspect is that it's necessary. And actually, we're talking off the recording, like we weren't recording yet, the role of education. And he pushed hard, because he pushed hard and said it's not just about gestalt, it's not just about form, right? It's got to be about meaning, and fit, right, and not doing harm. So it's part of the tension. It's like, how could you harmonize those 2 points, right? In terms of it not being antagonistic to it. I understand for the sake of polemics, he needed to do that, but that's not the full story. Because certainly he's asked the question, how can you make something beautiful, but also significant, right? And do things that are beautiful, that are going to benefit people. That's an interesting question, And I think that's, so the text doesn't even simply just says there's a problem, and let me talk about that problem, but it doesn't really give you the framework to even think of what the possibility, what does this look like? That's partly, so I'm using visual inspiration slightly a little abstractly than normal. I think it's definitely a 1 for all the particular reasons of like how we normally been using the definition. In all case, like it's just that's not what this book's for. It doesn't hold it against it. The area where I will give it some, just to summarize again, why I'm saying on a secondary element about it is because he's asking us to consider a new way of working in design, to see design in a new way, right? To visualize it in a new way. And I think the text's emphasis of the no's with very kind of shrug of yes is limiting its effectiveness, which will, I think, affect its other aspects. But with that said, it got a 1 for me for that reason.
Yeah, very well said, Thomas. And if I could, I would have rated this one a 0, because there is 0 visual inspiration throughout this entire book. So, Michael, there we go. Just throw it
Nice.
out there, and be clear. If you are looking for a design book that does have visual inspiration, and you're a UX designer or UI designer, this is not going to be it. To Thomas's points, I think Mike Montiero could have benefited and improved this book if he had brought along different visual diagrams that could help explain the different concepts. Especially, there could have been some visuals of dark UX patterns, so we can see what that looks like. There could have been some visuals of the good patterns, so you see the contrast. And even visuals around, like, he talks about, venture capitalists are basically all for themselves. So like, and in their investments, and how startups are, looking to just sort of float their numbers. So like a graph to show that explosion from when a startup goes from like a team of 30 people to a team of 300,000. I think like graphs or even like funny infographics could have gone along with this and made this book hilarious, like even more hilarious, because he's also very funny in his approach. And I think as a designer, visual inspiration could have been woven throughout the narrative to just make this book, bring the point home more clearly with visuals and just make it more fun. So, yeah.
I do like, Matheo, your notion about diagramming, because there were other books we've read, like 7 Habits, for example, very conceptual, right? Very concept based, not visual length, not visual communication based, but had concepts, and it made visuals to help you support its understanding. So I think that's actually a very fair critique. on this text. And I think the dark patterns are actually a very good one. He described it very well in prose, but I think having a visual to show you what those dark patterns look like would reinforce his claims much stronger. I think that's very fair.
Yeah, I think it's less focused on solutions. So like, that's probably why it was more getting the word out there, to make sure that these things are seen. So solutions wasn't a part of this book for sure. All right, moving on. Practical application. All right, so I'm probably going to be, and I was thinking about this from a perspective of like, today's world, especially like, because a lot of talk was all about the startups and that type of world, and it makes 100%, it makes total sense to me. And I've been in this, but it's like I said, this is the AI revolution of all this is something that I think is the big disruptor even to this. I think there's even more things that are opened up. So I'm gonna put this right in the middle. The practical application is there. Because the questions are relevant. They're still very relevant. In any realm, if you read this. But it doesn't have the concrete tools or the real world navigation of this. And I was even thinking of from my perspective, it's like, especially when I'm trying to find work, it's like, I know the companies that I won't work for. There's other things like, for instance, I don't know if I were to work for like a tobacco company or like a vaping company, where it's like, my brother vapes and he loves it. But I mean, I know it's ethically, and for me, it's just not my thing. So it's like, it does make me question it. And, again, these issues are ones that I've never considered in my career. And because especially when you're, I won't say desperate for work, but when you're really trying to work, you kind of, you let your guard down a little bit as far as who you work for. And you usually say to yourself, it's just a matter of time before I get another job. So, yeah, but this actually made me think about it. It's like, what do I want my legacy to be? So, for that, I'll say the practical application is right in the middle.
What's funny? So like, I agree with everything Michael's saying. And in fact, I think that's actually one of the weaknesses of this book. It was way too fixed on a very particular historical time in Silicon Valley, because that's what Mike knew, as we were talking about, with the dominance of capital in the startup culture. And what's happened is that capital has now moved to AI, and it's causing massive disruption, right? Economic priorities. Now, this operation is still happening. And in fact, there's this particular ethics of design of AI, what it's doing. But it's the same kind of issue where it's always what Mike is trying to push back on. And this is why I'm actually sympathetic to this book, is that even with its temporal focus of a certain time frame that's slightly not relevant anymore, the basic question of, hey, design has a worth that is more than, quite frankly, just being a sycophant to our clients. They give them whatever they want and satisfy them. He's kind of calling on us to have a certain professional integrity of practice and craft. And its reasoning I don't necessarily agree with, because it's based on an argument of harm. You can make an argument, and he tries his best to try to do it, but it's actually, in one sense, he's proven correct with AI, in a sense of like AI psychosis, for example, like people actually getting mentally ill from using AI products. So there are cases of actual harm happening from that. But the point is, though, to ask these questions, and as Michael said and Matteo, that people don't even think of this. The nice thing about any kind of work in philosophy is that it generally, when done well, should have value and actual like framing of questions for you to think about, regardless where you are in your career and regardless of what happens. Ideally, some better than others, but I do think this book does enough to, again, it gives you enough in part two to make concrete what is he talking about and where does this come up as attention. And some of them, and listen, I think actually it's a practical application of just saying, just be honest about what's going on here in the circumstances. He does say that, and I really appreciate that. For example, if you're on an HB2 visa, you have student loan debt, you're under a very precarious situation where now you have to weigh your options in a very different way. What Mike is simply saying is you don't get just acknowledge what's happening and why you're doing what you're doing. I think that's incredibly practically legitimate. I think it's legitimate, and I think it's a very clear application. So there's a really payoff. I think he just wants us to hold ourselves to account of what's actually at play, and if we're okay with what that signifies about us and on how we want to live our lives. I think that's the best ethics can do, quite frankly, especially at even this level, introduction level, which is this book is basically introduction. So as a result, I think it is very practical, even with this hindsight of, I think, a false model in terms of how to justify the claim, and more importantly, its time frame and orientation of Silicon Valley. Those things are kind of deducting a little bit of its value, and the fact that it is very UX oriented. There is a subsection in part 2 about that where he talked about. I remember Mike talking about this in his podcast many years ago, where he was trying to get associated with AIGA, and AIGA was like, "You're not one of us. You're not one of our people. Go do your own thing, or go to the other guys." And then he went to the information architect guys, and they were like, "No, not for us. No, thank you." Anyway, so they felt like basically a homeless community in terms of there's no home for UX UI designers of their practice and craft and a professional organization. Anyways, so my point, it tips the hand of what Mike is talking about. So I'm kind of long-winded, but the point is, for all those reasons, I gave it a 4 out of 5 based on those points.
Nice. Yeah, I landed solid with Michael. I'm right at a 3, and I'll keep it pretty concise. The fact that he gives us a lot of different problems to face and then says, let's wake up and do something different. I'm at a 3 because he says, here's a solution. Unions, for example, AIGA and information architecture, IA communities saying there's a big gap. What's the solution? Well, you change and you adapt and you work in this field, or new organizations are going to form that represent that field better. And he also proposes a solution of, if a larger organization was backing every designer and to make more ethical decisions and to have lawyers on call ready to go, just like is the case for, I think, the Actors Guild that's there. They have lawyers ready at the whim, if there's any dispute. So yeah, I think that's why I landed at a 3, and not at a 5, because what I didn't see is, in my day-to-day, how can I apply this? I see Mike Montiero, really on a rant and pointing out a ton of different things for that I want to change in the industry and in my day-to-day, but I don't see a lot of ways to apply it in my day-to-day workflow or decision making. And so that's why I didn't land any higher there. So yeah.
Yeah, should we move on to
yeah, we can get. I know we're just hyper time this week, so yes, we can move on. And luckily, I think this one's gonna be very fast. So, Michael,
yes, this will be very fast. Let's just put this at a 1. Now, I do have to make the caveat, and I thought about this, the typographic insight, because I had this book on. I listened to this book, so whereas usually we have a book and we can look at the typography and all the visuals in it as well. So I'm listening to the book. So for that, but it doesn't go much into typography and visual craft. Those are secondary discussions. We're talking about ethics, systems, and responsibility. So typographic, this is not the book to go to for sure.
I mean, I think everybody no surprise what's going to happen here. We're going to get a big pile up of 1s over here. Yep. The closest we get is things like the dark patterns of purposely obfuscation. Don't make your typography hard to read would be a mode of that's me reading into it. I don't even think Mike even says that, but I'm just thinking where would you even possibly find typographic points related to ethics? Misconstruing, misrepresenting, making things illegible on purpose or very difficult to see. That's the closest we're going to get. But besides that, yeah, that's this book. You're not coming for this book. There's no Bringhurst, right? It's that's not what we're doing this. This is no Secrets of Lettering, right, from Montiero Flora. So, anyways, that's my rating. Matteo?
Yeah, Michael, I read the book, and then there's a chunk where I had to just jump into the audiobook. I think part one fully I read, some of part two, and then I jumped into the audiobook from the beginning again. And the whole thing just read as a rant. It just sounded like a nice long rant from Mike Montiero about all of these issues. But in both cases, the book itself isn't designed in a way that inspires typography insights. So I landed at a solid one. And I think what Thomas was saying is absolutely correct, because I had time in UX UI. There's a ton of things that you need to do with typography to be ethical, right? Like picking colors. Like a lot of designers I see just pick colors because they look good, but those colors that look good unfortunately aren't legible by a huge Porsche population of people who have different variations of blind color blindness, right? And color blindness isn't a one type all. It's not just some people see everybody sees gray. No, it's like there's different types, and there's an inability to discern between certain colors. So I think he could have expanded on that through his expertise, but he doesn't cover that at all. And he's not coming from a type background. And if you wanted to, you could have probably taken a stake here and made some more information about typography and ethics, but like it just didn't apply for him, and he just breezed past it. So yeah, that's how I would landed here.
Yeah, Joe, I generally don't disagree with anything being said. Shall we move on?
Let's do it. So the overall impact. So, we've been rating some of these very low, and I think they're just low because of, what we're looking at, and in our rubric as well. So, but I think that overall impact, I have to give this a 5. In fact, again, this is probably where I would even go above this. And because I have the audiobook, if I read the book, I would literally hear his voice saying all these things. And I do feel that, it challenges fundamentally, how designers think about, the power and their accountability. And I feel like if this book was written any other way, but in the tone that it is, it might not have had the impact. I think the urgency is there. The way that, especially in the audiobook where it's just, he's very blunt. And again, I can hear his voice in every page, if I were to read this. But I think that, his, he really stresses the consequences of the work and the work that you put out there as a designer. So there's a ton of accountability. And I also, the impact for me was I didn't know that I had that much power, and that I could, I actually could make these decisions. And it was empowering to me to know that, especially like you were talking about the UX stuff, like I was kind of jumped into UX, having good design skills and a passion for typography. But I didn't know that power actually affected so many people. And especially because my girlfriend also runs a nonprofit. So, me contributing to that effort, and I'm not looking to make $1 million. I'd rather, save a million lives. And that's what that kind of work will do.
I think besides some limits, I think actually, again, the virtue of this book is that very personal, narrative, compelling storytelling from Mike Montiero. He loves having, he's a big personality with a very clear point of view. That's its great advantage, and that's also its slight weakness. And I appreciate him even pointing it out. It's like, listen, I'm not a moral philosopher. And yeah, I'm going to talk about ethics and morals like they're the same. And I know they're not, for anyone who actually knows it, like who's actually serious about this topic. I think those are things that do effectively hinder its effectiveness long term because of that, and just in general the UX orientation, and it's overly focused on like 4 cases that he repeats over and over and over again. However, as his examples, he keeps pointing to make his case. Now, with that said, the only thing the other text I could think of for an ethics and design is the Mill and Glaser the list of 10 are going to hell for designers. Like, that's it. Like, this is such a robust advancement compared to the Mill and Glazer texts on ethics. And actually, quite frankly, even more so than First Things First manifesto. Like, that was kind of lame compared to, like, I appreciate this is so much more robust compared to that. In terms of what I mean by that is, Mike Montiero, I think, does address, like, he does, I believe, if I remember correctly from the text, he does address environmentalism. Like, he does address that it's legitimate as an angle of discussion, but he does it with such more larger totality, right? And more force of argumentation. I think it's one of our areas of overall impact is has to contribute to the discourse, and I think it has compared to those other texts I'm citing in graphic design. Because I can't think of any other ethics text I would even give someone in the field just to get started or thinking about it. Is it complete? No. Does it have positive directions? No. But that's not the issue. The issue is, can you help us think through another domain of design that didn't consider before? And the answer is yes. But so even with those limitations, I think bring it down because of this, as we discussed as a group. I do think it's very legitimate, and it's something you should consider. Even if you disagree with Mike, and I think, again, on the particulars of his argumentation, there are some faulty arguments where he basically says, if you don't agree with me on this point, then we can't talk. And that's fine. So I appreciate it. I appreciate what he's saying, but in terms of moral reasoning for a whole discipline, unfortunately, that doesn't hold up so hot. So with that said, for those reasons, he gets a 4 for me.
I love seeing that Michael landed at a 5. Thomas, I'm right aligned with you that I landed at a 4 for overall impact. And for me, the reason that I didn't land at a 5, I was thinking 5. I was leaning towards 5. But when I finished the book and I look back at it, I'm just kind of like, okay, for it to be a 5 and the overall impact, I would love to see an updated edition from Mike Montiero where now he further discusses like AI and what's happening in the world. I think this conversation and the points that he hits are absolutely relevant to today, and you can immediately translate it over. So there's a lot of opportunity there if you want to publish an updated version of this book. Mike Montiero, go for it, and I would love to read it. And yeah, I think the overall impact is high on this book, especially over other books, because it stands out. This is a standout. Who else has written so thoroughly about design ethics and argued very clearly why we should have a design union that could help all disciplines of design, not just graphic designers or UX designers, but everyone in between. So I love this for that reason, because he went to the place where nobody else wants to go. And he's also talked about how that's when he's brought up like unionizing design, people have like taken a swing at him, or just been like so pissed off and angry and just don't want to talk about that, or like licensing in design, they get so offended. And it's like, well, look, he makes a clear argument for why that would actually be a benefit, and why an organization or association could help us in so many ways, just as the promise was always of AIGA being an association that would help all the designers throughout the arc of their career. And they kind of failed. They did fail. They did fail for a big period. And I think now the people who are there, are trying to do something different about it because of the people like Mike who have stood their ground. So yeah, for overall impact, I think it's there. Mike Montiero, you impacted the design industry in a way that not many people have. So thank you.
Shout outs to Rachel Eleanor, our Type Thursday LA alumnus, who is president-elect of AIGA. So yes, so hopefully good things will come for AIGA in the future.
Awesome.
Okay. So again, I know we're tight for time. So, I went the wrong way. Whoops. Okay. So this is an abridged book club because Matheo has a birthday party to go to. So reminder, it's Type Thursday next week. Oh, didn't know that. I thought we had an episode next week. Okay, so we are not online next week. We are in person and Type Thursday next week. The following week this is Strategy, Make Better Plans by Seth Gordon. So I'm looking forward to that. So it's actually not a design text, it's a marketing text. And so, but it's kind of fun. We're going like very high level marketing, and then we're going right to the foundation. We've got The Stroke, A Theory of Writing from Harriet Nordzai. It's going to be a great time. So that's my home base of type design, calligraphy training, the connection of those two relationships. So the next 2 episodes I'm looking forward to, just because how extreme the differences are going to be. It's going to be really fun next 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, excuse me, because Type Thursday is in person. And then we have the 2 book clubs after. Speaking of which, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Type Thursday Book Club. We're on YouTube. When you get notified, if you subscribe, you get notified. And that is a great time because then you get to join us for these great conversations about typography and design and books. With that said, Matheo, close us out. I know you got a birthday party to go to. What's going on in Type Thursday LA?
So next Thursday, if you want to celebrate my birthday with me, you can join us at Type Thursday. Going to be happening in Highland Park at York Manor. Officially announcing the location. Our friend over there got us the space. Thank you, Chris Lim, who connected us to Dee, the founder of York Manor. York Manor is a place where you can co-work and bring your work and work out of your home and get away from all the home distractions for any creatives who need that third space to go to. Check out York Manor. We're going to be there next Thursday, so if you want to see the space, and 3 presenters will show their work, and the audience, that's you, get to give your feedback and participate in our live interactive format.
Love it.
Very good.
Love it.
And Michael, I believe, do you have a Type Thursday happening next week?
We do. Dialogue in downtown Phoenix, May 28th. Go to Type Thursday PHX on Instagram, and you can find out all the information. Link is in the bio to get those tickets. We want to see you out there. Let's represent Phoenix and celebrate Mateo's birthday.
Yeah,
I know, even more so. Exactly. Have a drink for you in his honor. Absolutely. Well, everybody, let's get out of here so Matheo can go get his birthday dinner. Thank you for everyone for joining us in the chat. The chat's been doing great. Some fun conversations going on over there.
Thanks for joining.
So be sure to come hang out with us during the Type Thursday Book Club and be part of the conversation. So it's been a pleasure to talk with everybody. Everyone, I'll see you guys in 2 weeks, the next Type Thursday Book Club. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.